there's only one Charles Dickens, you know? So don't try and be the next Charles Dickens. Try and be the first, in my case, Phillip York. But try and be unique. Try and be you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Writing Inspiration with Markee Books. Our guest today is Phillip York. How are you, Phillip?
I'm well, thank you very much, Daniel. Not bad at all. Good to see you.
Great to see you too. You're from the UK, right?
Yes, I'm slap bang in the middle. I'm as central as you can be in the United Kingdom. So yeah, quite a few miles away from you.
Well, there are like 5-6 hours of difference from us. So tell me, Phillip, how long has you been a writer?
Wow, I've been a writer longer than I care to remember. So I started out as a newspaper journalist when I was about 23 years of age. I'm considerably older than that now. So yeah, so I started out as a newspaper reporter, went on to become a section editor, specializing in certain subjects. And then I've made the migration into writing books.
Wow. When exactly that happened?
What, the migration into writing books?
Yeah.
About 6 years ago. And I've got an American friend to thank for that.
Wow. Only 6 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it. I've been prodded and poked by a few people to write books in the past, and they've always given me lots of suggestions. And I've got a particular friend in New York called Janique, who has been prodding and poking me for about, 15 years to write a certain type of book. And I've got to admit, what she thought was a good book and what I thought were good books were two different things. But eventually, one day, I was in a museum in the United Kingdom, and it's to do with the Civil War in the United Kingdom, which took place in the 17th century. And I just stumbled across this incredible character who lived. And this character was one of the men. There were 50-something men in the United Kingdom in 1649 who were responsible for the death of Charles I, King Charles I of England.
Oh.
And this man's story really captivated me. And it was at that moment I knew I'd found my subject for a book.
So do you write history books?
Yeah, I write a genre of book called historical fiction. So 80% of what I write is historically accurate. It follows a very strict historical timeline. The characters are real people, overwhelmingly. And then the remaining 20% is my embellishment, is my creation, is my fiction, my fantasy, if you like.
Everyone do that when they write historical, actually.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I try and stay faithful to the characters and the story and the real events that happen, because I'm a great believer that you have to respect history. Yeah, you can't play with it. You've got to respect it. And then what I do is I try and weave in some subplots, one or two colourful characters, so that hopefully everything combines into something that's quite compelling reading. That's the ambition anyway.
Of course. What type of books inspired you, or did you usually read?
I love history. There's a great book about American history, North American history, that inspired me many years ago, and it's called I Buried My Heart at Wounded Knee. And it's the story of the Native American Indian and how they were subjected to decades of abuse and some terrible deeds done by the white man in America. And that kind of book captures my imagination. And in the UK, we've got some really interesting historical characters. So I'm fascinated by a guy called Robert the Bruce, who was the King of Scotland, who defeated the English at a famous battle called Bannockburn in the early 14th century. So he captivates me. I'm interested in Edward I, who's a controversial figure. And then more recently, I'm interested in people like Oliver Cromwell.
I think I saw a movie about that controversial figure you said.
Well, Edward I is a very controversial figure.
Yeah, I mean that the name, I think I saw it in a movie.
If you've ever seen that wonderful Mel Gibson film called Braveheart, which is about 2% historically accurate, but a great movie. Edward I is obviously he is certainly not the hero of that film.
Oh, yes, you're right. I remember now.
Yeah, but there are other portrayals of him. And the historical fact, he was a great warrior king, and a lot fairer maybe than Mel Gibson made him out to be in the context of Braveheart. But so yeah, so people like that. But I like people who are gritty. I like gritty characters. I like people who I like to write about things where there's some passion and conviction, and so yeah, so the Civil War period in England, and most listeners in North America, for example, probably don't know much about the English Civil Wars. It's plural, not singular. So there were three of them, and they lasted between 1642 and 1651, and they were brutal. So we think about the Great War, 1914 to 1918, as being one of the great killers of people. The greatest killer of the British population were the English Civil Wars between 1642 and 1651. Almost double the percentage terms died in the Civil Wars than they did in the Great War.
I did hear about one. Never knew there were more than one.
Yeah, so the main one lasted between 1642 and 1646. And that's where there were three major battles. There's battles at a place called Marston Moor and Naseby. Naseby really ended King Charles I's reign. But then the Civil Wars became a battle between England and Scotland. So there's been this. I don't know how familiar you are with the history of England and Scotland, but there's often been bloodshed. Yeah, there's often been bloodshed.
I know the three countries were always in through each other's throats.
Yes, absolutely. None more so than in the middle of the 17th century. So England, before the Civil War, the Civil Wars in England, 2 years prior to that, there was something called the Bishops' War. And that was a war between England and Scotland. And Charles I had been humiliated. The Scots had roundly and soundly beaten the English armies. So as you can imagine, for Charles I, that was a significant humiliation. Didn't do him any favors at home where he was already struggling. And then less than 2 years later, the Civil Wars erupted. So we've had lots of conflict. And then, of course, that carried on into the 18th century, culminating in Culloden.
I always wonder why the island nations usually have such bloody stories.
That's a very good question. I
wonder if because of they are islands surrounded by sea with no contact or usually minimum contact, they only fight between each others. But I mean, in France, Italy, it's always with everyone else.
Yeah, for some reason we like violence, and when you combine ego with brute force, that's when you just look through history, and there's been a lot of ego, hasn't there? A lot of ego has resulted in conflict, and England, as I say, at that particular time, Britain at that particular time, it's exactly the same. And unfortunately, we don't learn from our mistakes. We keep repeating those same mistakes.
Yeah. Well, it's human nature, actually. More.
Yeah, but it's a remarkable time. It's a remarkable time, and as I say, every continent, every part of the world's got its own interesting stories, hasn't it? So for me, it's very much this period at this moment in time. And what I'm doing is I'm in the middle of writing a 5-book series.
Wow. So I wanted to ask you something. Was it difficult for you to move from newspapers to actual writing? Did you struggle it?
Oh, that's a really interesting question and a really relevant question, because I used to be a news reporter. I used to be an investigative journalist. And when you do investigations, it's crash, bang, wallop. It is hit people with the facts, keep hitting them with the facts. You might write 1,500 words, 2,000 words. That's a big investigation. You may do it over 3 or 4 weeks. You may do it. I did investigations lasting years, 3, 4, 5 years in some instances, but I'd only write little 400 word, 1,000 word, 800 word news stories, all impactful words. Obviously, writing a book's a very different exercise. And I used to struggle when an editor would say to me, Tony, when I was a journalist, Philip, go and write me a feature on such and such and put lots of color in it. I was trained to take the color out of it, and I was trained to put fact into it. You know, particularly the world I operated in, which was very much fraught with danger, because if you got it wrong, we have a highly litigious culture in the UK, and if you get it wrong, people sue you for libel. So you've got to get it right. So writing this more sort of colorful stuff was really difficult, I thought, until I found the character and the stories around this character that really inspired me. And when you're inspired, you almost become that person that you're writing about. And funnily enough, I found no difficulty whatsoever. So my first book was about 110,000 words, 110,000 words. The second book was 125,000 words. The next book, which I'm writing, which is called Regicide, that book is likely to be at least 125,000 words. It can easily be 150,000 words. I've written 20,000 at the moment, but it's easy peasy.
So you're going on the third one?
Yeah, I'm writing the third one now. The first one came out in 2019. The second one came out in 2021. And I've written another book in between, but it's not part of this series. It's a more contemporary story. That's called, Sunshine on My Mind. It's a more very personal story, that. And so I'm now back into historical fiction mode, and they're big numbers. You know, they're big numbers. They're not quite as big. Have you heard in the States, and have you heard of an author called C.J. Sansom? Does that name ring any bells?
A little bit. Why?
Unfortunately, he passed away. He passed away in his early 70s this year. He was a phenomenal writer. He had a character in the Tudor period of England. And his books would frequently be 750,000 words, that kind of thing. So mine are small fry in comparison to his. But even so, going from writing newspaper articles to writing books, it's a quantum leap. But what makes it so much easier is having characters and stories that inspire you. And so, I mean, if any of your listeners have a passion, have a desire to write books, I think my encouragement would be, make sure you're inspired, not going through the motions, because if you're going through the motions, you are going to be frustrated and you're going to come to a shuddering halt. Get yourself characters, get yourself storylines that have got plenty of meat on the bone, that you can just get your computer terminal, start tapping away on your keyboard, and before you know it, 3 or 4 hours have gone by, and suddenly you've written 3,500, 4,000 words effortlessly. That's what happens when you've got good characters. And also you need to do some discipline as well. So get yourself a chapter structure, get your structure all together.
An outline.
Yeah, but a detailed outline. So you follow it so that you're then embellishing that outline. You're bringing that outline to life. If you can do that, it is a disciplined structure. There's nothing wrong with being creative. Creativity is absolutely key, but you need to combine creativity with discipline. Do that, and it's potent.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, of course it is. So, did you struggle with something when you started?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you first start, it's a journey into the unknown. I mean, you've never done this before. So, yeah, you're going to make so many mistakes. I think one of the biggest mistakes is thinking that you've got to write a unique book and your intro has to be the greatest intro that's ever been written, ever been known to man or woman. There's only one Charles Dickens, you know? So don't try and be the next Charles Dickens. Try and be the first, in my case, Phillip York. Or actually, there was a Phillip York that predated me. There is actually another author called Phillip York, but he is a couple of hundred years ago. But try and be unique. Try and be you. And you can always go back and edit and revise. So just start telling the story. And I think what I discovered with the first book was certainly developing the style, the writing style. It was probably a little bit shaky at first, but as I got into the book, as I got into chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, my confidence started to grow. My assuredness, my clarity started to grow. And therefore, what I was able to do was continue to complete the book in that kind of space, in that kind of moment. But then I could go back to the beginning of the book and rewrite certain parts in the style that I'd ended the book in. So there was consistency. There may well be people out there, it certainly doesn't apply to me, that can just literally sit down, get a pen out, away they go. And what they've created is absolutely Pulitzer Prize winning. It's award winning prose. That isn't me. And I don't think that's the overwhelming majority of authors. You have to work at it. Discipline, though, underpins the working at it.
Of course. So you mentioned it before that you have like 3 books and one spin-off. Actually, I think that sometimes when you're writing a series, sometimes you need a rest and write something else. Do not get like overwhelmed or bored with your series to get new ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're so right. Particularly if you care about what you're doing. Now, I suspect every author feels like that. I certainly do. And the character I write about is a man called Francis Hacker. Francis was executed in 1660 for his role in killing Charles I. His life is an extraordinary story of faith, of love, conflict, relationships, of revolution. And therefore, there's a real obligation on the part of me as the writer to be faithful to the character, his family, his descendants, his legacy. You can't do that if you're just bashing something out year in, year out. It's got to be fresh. It's got to be revitalized. You've got to find new ways of bringing the character to life and the other characters to life. You've got to try and make it as authentic as possible. It's a big responsibility. So you've got to be fresh. So it's good to do something different, go away, recharge your batteries, come back, go again. And that's exactly what I did.
I have a question. From the 3 books on your series, they're all about this character, or after Regicide, you will change to another one?
No, the 5-book series is all about, it's an 18-year period. It's from 1642 to 1660, which were, for Britain and Europe, very, very turbulent times. And it's the role this man played in supporting Oliver Cromwell, in bringing a king to trial. The only time a king has been executed through legal process in British history, and the life he led afterwards and his struggles to be a better man at all times. And ultimately the way he died, because his death was actually quite a glorious death. If you can die gloriously, Francis Hacker did. So it's telling that story. It's a rip-roaring adventure that's made even more rip-roaring because it's true.
Okay, let's avoid the spoilers for the next books and Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Are you planning something for like the future after this series?
Yeah, I am actually. I'm thinking I've come across another character. So the character Francis Hacker was a parliamentarian. Yeah. He was not a royalist. We have 2 factions. Yeah. Parliamentarian and king, the king side. So I'm writing the parliamentarian story at the moment. I've come across another fascinating character. I'm going to write just a one-off book about him. But then I'm going to turn my attention to most probably the Second World War. And then I'm going to write a story about, I've got a germ of an idea about the Second World War, which I hope would be quite interest. Yeah, quite a lot of interest.
From the British perspective?
No, I tell you what it is. Somebody I know told me this, that they were asking me some questions about historical research. And we started chatting, and this person said to me, she said, well, I'm trying to research my grandfather, because my grandfather was Polish. And he was captured by the Nazis, and he was forced to fight for the Nazis. And he fought for the Nazis for about 2.5 years until he was captured by the Americans, interrogated by the Americans, freed by the Americans, and able to join the American army, and took part in Normandy, the Normandy invasion and the liberation of Europe as an American soldier. And I looked into it, and there are tens of thousands of Polish men who were subjected to this. They were given an ultimatum. You fight for us, the Nazis, and your family live. If you don't fight for us, we will kill you and we will kill your family. What kind of ultimatum is that? So, I mean, I've got a feeling he probably fought for quite a nasty part of the German army, this particular man. I mean, typically the Germans would put you in some pretty heavy duty combat units, often with the Waffen-SS, doing some terrible things. So I think there's a story that really intrigues me. You know, you go from such a dark place to real light starts to pour in, but that situation has brought great shame to many people in Poland, many men and families in Poland who have not been able to deal with this. So I'm thinking of looking into that. I think there's potentially a really interesting story. It's one of those subjects that, we've exhausted the Second World War in many respects, but it's one of those subjects that we haven't really explored.
Actually, yeah, I just hearing you, I noticing that it's nothing I ever heard before.
Yeah. There's some interesting stuff. Obviously, the whole V2 rocket program, and how the Americans then came in and grabbed all those German scientists. There was a race to grab the scientists at the end of the war, and those scientists then fueled the Russian and the American space programs.
Yeah, I remember that.
So that was one of my thoughts earlier. Is there any sort of mileage in that? Because that fascinates me as well. But to be honest, I think what happened to this block of Eastern European men, it's not a forgotten story. These men and their families, they're living with this shame day in, day out today, those that survive. And for those that have died, the families were never able to reconcile themselves to it. So, yeah, I think I might have a little dig around and poke around about that.
Okay. Well, tell me a bit, are you planning to go to any event in person so your fans can meet you?
I do intend to do so. I'm doing lots of talks in the UK at the moment about the subject that I do. I belong to something called the Historical Novel Society. They've got a New York chapter. They often do conferences in places like Dublin and in the UK. So I'm thinking of popping over maybe to the States sometime soon and maybe attending some of those things. But certainly in Europe, believe it or not, I've probably got more readers in North America and Canada than I've got in the UK.
I guess because the story, they already know it there, maybe.
No, certainly in North America, there's an absolute fascination and love of history. And through the readers I've got in North America, members of the Hacker family have been in touch with me. Descendants of Francis Hacker have come to me, and I've had at least 3 groups of the family get in touch with me. They reach out to me. And the great thing about it, certainly Americans, is they're so proud of their roots, so proud of their ancestry, and they know it so much. It's wonderful in a way that we don't in Britain. We forgot for some reason. It doesn't float our boat over here anymore.
I see. Oh, that is strange. I always thought
it's a shame. It's a tragedy.
I always thought in the other way about it, that they were probably too proud about it. Funny.
Yeah, it is funny. Funny how it pans out.
Yeah. Well, do you have social media or places where people can get your books or communicate with you?
Yeah. I'm available on lots of bookshops online. So if you just put the name Phillip York, Rebellion or Redemption in a search engine, you'll find me. I've got a website, phillipyork.org is my website, and you'll find me on Twitter. I try not to do Facebook. I've just recently come off it, and do you know what? I feel so much better for doing so.
Usually people refer that to Twitter mostly.
Yeah, I use social media. I've had some very useful interactions with it, but overwhelmingly, I find it, it takes away a lot of oxygen that you can't get back. It's, I find it quite a frustrating thing. Maybe that's my age, or maybe I've got some prejudices towards social media.
Believe me, you're not the only one.
That's reassuring. Thank you.
And I'm not young, but I'm not old either. So it's not only you.
Well, that is very reassuring. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming, Phillip. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been great to talk to you, Daniel.
Thank you for coming to another episode of Writing Inspiration with Markee Books. Good day, everyone. Bye.